Welcome to eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Good evening and welcome to eBible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 19 in Genesis chapter 35. And we're reading from verse 16. And they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. And it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Okay, in our last study, we looked at several scriptures that tie together Ephrath or Ephrata with Bethlehem, and it was the home of David and the son of Jesse, the family of David. It was the place where Boaz and Ruth had their son Obed, and it's also the place that Micah chapter 5 verse 2 referred to in reference to the birth of the Messiah, or the entry of the Messiah into the world. It would come through Bethlehem, Judah. And I'll read that verse again in Micah chapter 5. Micah 5 verse 2. We read there, But thou Bethlehem Ephratah, not Bethlehem Judah, but Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. And we saw how that Bible verse is quoted in Matthew 2, and the wise men went to Bethlehem after being informed of Micah 5 verse 2 and its direction there, and then they were warned of God not to return to Herod, so they departed another way, and Herod was furious. He felt he was mocked of those wise men, and he sent forth his soldiers and slew all the children 2 years and under, according to the time he had ascertained from the wise men when they first saw the star. And it was a terrible slaughter of poor little babies, and so the statement was made where the Lord quoted Jeremiah 31 in verse 15. In Ramah there was weeping and lamentation and mourning, Rachel weeping for her children. And so we saw that there's similarity, because Rachel did have tremendous sorrow in the birthing process. Giving birth to her son Benoni is what she called him, but then Jacob changed it to Benjamin. Benoni, son of my sorrow, and Benjamin, son of the right hand. So there was a difference where in Bethlehem, historically, at the time when the Lord Jesus was a young child, it was the children who were slain, not the mothers. It wasn't the mothers of Bethlehem. And yet in our account, it is Rachel herself that dies, and in her departing, she called her son's name Benoni. The son lived. The son did not die. Well, what's in view then as we look again to Genesis 35? Now we We want to try and understand the spiritual meaning, what's going on coming out of Bethel. We understand leaving the house of God, the corporate church, on the way to Bethlehem, Ephratah, we understand, going to the house of bread, going to the place of fruitfulness. And that's exactly the spiritual picture of the time of the Great Tribulation, as the house of God had come under judgment, and God commanded his people to get out and go out into the world because the latter rain was fallen. There was bread in Egypt, is the way it's put in the historical parable of the 7-year famine in the time of Joseph. There was famine in Canaan, representing the church, but bread in Egypt, typifying the world. Go out from Canaan to Egypt, leave the church, go out into the world to find bread. And that's a similar spiritual picture here. Go from Bethel to Bethlehem, leave. But during the trip, Rachel travails and has hard labor, and she dies in childbirth, but not before she names her son Benoni. Well, let's look at the word travailed. And as I mentioned before, the Hebrew word translated travailed as Strong's number 3205 is used often in the Old Testament. It's translated as beget or begat, bear, birth, delivered, labor, midwife, travail, and maybe a few other ways. And in our passage, it's found 3 times, translated 3 different ways. It's the word travailed, it's the word labor, she had hard labor, and it's the word midwife. The midwife said unto her, or the one who delivers said to her. But we're going to follow this word travail, where it's also translated as travail in other scriptures, to see what we can start to understand might be in view here. And what we will see, and what the Bible is going to reveal by following this word, is that travail or giving birth is something that the Lord identifies spiritually in both times of judgment, the time of the judgment on the church, the Great Tribulation, and the time of the judgment on the world, the final judgment of mankind. For example, first we'll look at how this word travail is used in connection with the judgment on the church. Let's go to Jeremiah 6, Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 22. I'll start reading there. Thus saith Jehovah, Behold, a people cometh from the north country, and a great nation shall be raised from the sides of the earth. Now, Judah lay in the south, and from their north was Babylon. So this is a reference to Babylon, and God did bring Babylon against Judah. They are the people that cometh from the north country. And then in verse 23, they shall lay hold on bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voice roareth like the sea, and they ride upon horses, set in array as men for war against thee, O daughter of Zion. We have heard the fame thereof. Our hands wax feeble. Anguish has taken hold of us, and pain as a woman in travail. And then in verse 26, O daughter of my people, gird thee with sackcloth, and wallow thyself in ashes. Make thee mourning as for an only son, most bitter lamentation, for the spoiler shall suddenly come upon us. See, like a woman in travail, and then it's related to mourning, most bitter lamentation. The Bible book, the book of Lamentations, is all about this very thing. It is describing the tremendous sorrow of the judgment of God upon the nation of Judah as he raised up King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to assail them and compass them about and destroy them. The awful tragedy, the grievous sorrow of watching Jerusalem be destroyed, of the temple being destroyed, of so many being carried to Babylon, so many put to death by the sword. It was extremely terrible, and certainly a time of most bitter lamentation. And that's what we see with a woman in travail, isn't it? That a woman is going through tremendous difficulty, hard labor. Her pains are upon her, and that fits the whole idea of tribulation and great tribulation, especially when God brought judgment on the corporate church. That's what he called it, great tribulation. Well, also, we read in Jeremiah in chapter 13, in verses 20 and 21, the word travail, where it says in verse 20, lift up your eyes and behold them that come from the north. Again, Babylon, coming to judge the corporate church, or historically to judge Judah. Where is the flock that was given thee, thy beautiful flock? What wilt thou say when he shall punish thee? For thou hast taught them to be captains, and as chief over thee. Shall not sorrows take thee as a woman in travail? And that would be saying the very same thing I just mentioned. The tribulation is sorrowful. It's just a pitiful thing to see the nation that you loved, and the nation that was God's representation on the earth, that represented his kingdom, destroyed by wicked men, by the enemies of the kingdom of God. The enemy was victorious. Very, very sorrowful. Well, also, we're going to see how the word travail is used in relationship to the judgment on the world. Now, keep in mind, now we're going to read about Babylon. And we'll also read that Babylon had an enemy come from the north. If we go to Jeremiah chapter 50, Jeremiah 50, we'll begin reading in verse 41. Behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel. They will not show mercy. Now, you see how very similar that is to what we read in Jeremiah 6. And this is one of the reasons why Mr. Camping thought that Babylon was a figure of the corporate church, because it's a people coming from the north against Babylon, just as in Jeremiah 6, a people came from the north against Judah. And it also used this very language that they're cruel, they will not show mercy, and so Mr. Camping made a determination that Babylon is representing the corporate church, and it can get very complex. However, in Jeremiah 50 and 51, it is not the corporate church. It is the world, the kingdom of Satan. And the reason the verses are similar, the language is similar, that the enemy comes from the north, is because to the north of Babylon were the Medes and the Persians. And the Medes and the Persians represent the wrath of God against the kingdom of Satan in the day of judgment. And we'll see that. We can prove that from the Bible. But I just wanted to point that out in case you notice the similarity of the language. This is not referring to the church here. It's referring to a tribulation. See, this is language of tribulation. And it's very similar because just think of our understanding of the two tribulations that come at the end of the world. The first tribulation, the Great Tribulation, judgment on the church, no salvation any longer within the congregations once the Spirit of God departs and Satan's spirit enters in. No mercy. No mercy. And then on May 21, 2011, the Spirit of God stops all activity as far as evangelization of the earth. No more salvation, no more mercy for the world. And both are spiritual. Both are accomplished or revealed by the Word of God. And so we can see why the similar language, because they are very similar judgments. First, take the cup of my wrath, God says in Jeremiah 25, and give it to the city called by my name, corporate church. Then take the cup and give it to the nations. Same cup of wrath. And therefore, similar judgment, spiritual judgment, removal of possibility of salvation. And also the language of coming from the north. One hand, the kingdom of Satan and the Gentiles come against the corporate church. But then when it's judgment on the world, well, how do you typify that? By this other nation who historically did conquer Babylon, the Medes and the Persians. Okay, let's continue reading in verse 42. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses, everyone put in array like a man to the battle, against thee, O daughter of Babylon. The king of Babylon hath heard the report of them, and his hands wax feeble. Anguish took hold of him, and pangs as of a woman in travail. Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the swelling of Jordan unto the habitation of the strong. And I'll stop reading there. We see that God says the king of Babylon heard the report, and his hands waxed feeble, and anguish took hold of him, pangs as of a woman in travail. Now, since the king of Babylon typifies Satan, how can we understand that Satan is waxing feeble and anguish taking a hold upon him and pangs as a woman in travail? We have to recognize the synonymous statements the Lord makes in Mark 3 between house, kingdom, Satan. That if a house divided, it falls. A kingdom divided, it falls. If Satan be divided, it falls. Synonymous. So that the kingdom of Satan can be identified with him. He is the representative of that kingdom. In other words, just as Adam was representative of the human race. And so if we read of the king of Babylon or Satan, his hands waxing feeble and anguish taking hold of him and pangs as a woman in travail, he would be representative of his kingdom, of all within. All of the unsaved of the earth are in this condition like a woman in travail. And by the way, the word pangs as of a woman in travail is found in Isaiah chapter 13. Isaiah 13. And how does that chapter begin? Look at verse 1. The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz did see. And what is the burden of Babylon? Verse 6. How ye, for the day of Jehovah is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore shall all hands be faint. Hands wax feeble, just like the king of Babylon. And every man's heart shall melt. See, it's not just the king. And they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed one at another. Their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of Jehovah cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. Well, that poor nation of Babylon, God's really going to destroy them in the day of Jehovah. It's a destruction from the Almighty. But good thing the rest of the nations of the world aren't destroyed, just Babylon. No, it's not just Babylon. Look at verse 10 and 11. For the stars of heaven and the constellation thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. Where do we read similar things? Matthew 24, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun is darkened and so forth. What was the tribulation? The judgment of God upon the church. And how did he accomplish it? By loosing Satan, typified by the king of Babylon, historically represented by the king of Babylon and that nation coming against Judah. Well, this is after the tribulation, after the 70 years Babylon was able to overcome the nation of Judah. Then out of the north arose the Medes and the Persians. They're also mentioned here in Isaiah 13 in a chapter where God says in verse 11, just to make sure we get this clear, and I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity. It's not just the nation of Babylon, it's the whole world, because Babylon represents the world. And in this judgment of God upon the world, well, lo and behold, the Medes and the Persians show up. In verse 16, their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses shall be spoiled, and their wives ravished. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver. And as for gold, they shall not delight in it. And it continues. So the historical situation of the Medes and the Persians conquering Babylon in Isaiah 13 is proven to represent the wrath of God coming against the world in the day of judgment, in the day of Jehovah. And at that time, mankind, or the unsaved inhabitants of the earth, their hands will be faint, their hearts will melt, they will be afraid, pangs and sorrow shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth, or that is delivering, a woman delivering, about to give birth. And the tribulation will lead up to the delivery. Look around the world today. Look around. Are we seeing tribulation? Well, that's what all this trouble is about. It's what all the talk of division is about. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. A house divided cannot stand. If you cannot stand, you're fallen. And Satan, if he be divided, he cannot stand, but has an end. It's the end of the world. It's the end of the evil kingdom of darkness of this world. And the nations of the world have fallen. The evidence of their fall is the chaotic madness, the chaotic divisiveness going across the nations, within the nations. It's not nation against nation so much, but the people that make up the nations against their own governments, against their own people. It is an evil going from nation to nation, as we hear reports of the severe trouble that is troubling the inhabitants of the earth, or tormenting the people of the world over this time period since May 21, 2011. That's what's in view. And just one last thing before we close our study. If we go to Isaiah 21, and in verse 3, we again read this similar language. Therefore my loins filled with pain, pangs have taken hold upon me, as the pangs of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it. I was dismayed at the seeing of it. My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me. And then it mentions, prepare the table, watch in the watchtower. And in this context, verse 8, and he cried, a lion, my Lord. I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and am set in my ward whole nights. And behold, there cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he has broken unto the ground. O my threshing and the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared unto you. The reference to trouble or pangs have taken hold upon me is the pangs of a woman that travaileth. And then the refrain, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. It is the judgment of God upon the world. Well, okay, we've run out of time, but we can see that I went to a couple of verses that spoke of a woman travailing and her pain and pang and so forth, dealing with judgment of great tribulation, judgment on the church, and also a few scriptures dealing with the judgment on the world. Now, when we get together in our next study, we're going to go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and that verse tells us of the day of the Lord. And if you remember, God said in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 3, for when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Well, we'll take a closer look into that verse and try to understand maybe a little bit better, if we can, what God has in view.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.